Pahlavi, the son, has lived in exile since then, mainly here in the United States. Thousands of Iranians have been killed in protests that began last month, protests that are seen as the most serious challenge to the Islamic regime since '79. President Trump is weighing military action to support the protesters. Pahlavi supports a U.S. intervention and says he's willing to return to lead his country if the theocratic regime falls.
If the people did not actually believe that I can be the person doing that for them or the person to be trusted, there wouldn't be the millions on the streets of Iran, in the four corners of Iran, chanting my name and asking my return. They do.
We're going to talk about Reza Pahlavi and what's next for Iran now with Jamal Abdi. He's the president of the National Iranian American Council. Welcome to Press Play.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so Reza Pahlavi, is the eldest son of the last Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Tell us more about him and what he's been doing since he was, as a young child, in exile.
Yeah, so he, as you note, is the son of the last Shah and seeks to... Well, his goals have shifted over time from wanting to restore the monarchy. There were, when he went into exile in the 1980s, there were consultations about potential attempts at overthrowing or toppling the Islamic regime and reinstalling the young Reza Pahlavi at the time. Those never came to fruition. But since then, he has sort of off and on been campaigning for removing the current regime, and has advocated for a secular democratic form of government. Now, I think that there is some hope on the streets that Reza Pahlavi is the sort of the leader of this uprising, and that if the regime falls, he could, go back in and be sort of this unifying leader who could oversee a transition from the current form of governance to a new form of governance. But I would note that, first of all, I don't think that there is a lot of organization on the ground for this figure. There are calls during this the recent rounds of protests supporting the Pahlavi dynasty or chanting Reza Pahlavi's name. Now, I think that whether those are symbolic calls and have been identified as a way to stick it to the regime, and to some degree, a sense of, for Iranians, that there is nobody that has any answers. Their current government doesn't have any way to get them out of the problems they're facing. The opposition inside of Iran has really been decimated and contained by the repressive regime and undermined by the economic sanctions and pressure from the outside. So we're in this place where nobody really knows what to expect with Reza Pahlavi, but and it's not for up to us to prejudge what the Iranian people want. But I think that for the last 40 years, we've seen somebody who has been an off and on campaigner for freedom, but not necessarily somebody who has built up any organizational power, either in the United States or inside of Iran.
Oh, so he hasn't actually built up any kind of power amongst the people who also fled Iran and have made their lives elsewhere here in the United States, perhaps here in Los Angeles. There are many Iranian expatriates, shall we say, who have made their lives here. They don't see him, or they don't want him, as the future leader of Iran necessarily?
There are many who do. And I think that the real concentration of that support is in the Los Angeles, Southern California area. And I think that sentiment, maybe a decade ago, was scoffed at. And, this is a figure that was sort of viewed as a political hobbyist, but not necessarily somebody who could seriously potentially go back to a country he hadn't seen in several decades and be able to rule the country. What I'm talking about, though, is that there is no organization behind that. Now, there have been some organizations that have cropped up in the past few years sort of supporting his agenda, but any serious ability to, if you want to build a state, you probably need to be able to build an organization when you are in exile. And that just has not happened. There's the example in 2022 of this opposition coalition that was attempted to be constructed during the Women Life Freedom protests, and that quickly devolved into attacks and disorganization and fell apart very quickly. And I think this is an ominous sign for what is possible if you have a movement that is largely about sort of chants and slogans and nostalgia for the past, but doesn't necessarily have the ability to create organization and hierarchy and bureaucracies and mobilize people in an organized way beyond chanting slogans.
Right. And there is no clear leader inside the country that has been able to step forward and say, I am someone who can lead this country going forward should the regime fall.
Everybody who has stepped up within the country has been jailed, threatened, silenced, and the ability to forge networks has been closed off. And so you do have notable people inside of Iran. You have recent Nobel Prize winner Narges Mohammadi, who is in jail. You have people like Nasrin Sotoudeh, prominent human rights lawyer. You have others, some who are associated with, the reformist movement in Iran, and so have been written off by a lot of people because that movement has been viewed as exhausted and not able to bring change. So really, after decades of repression internally and then external pressure and sanctions and a hollowing out of the country economically, a collapse of the middle class, inability for civil society to actually build connections and networks, you have a situation where if the regime falls, and I think many people hope that this regime is a thing of the past, but if it falls, there is no clear infrastructure in place to ensure that it doesn't fall and lead to anarchy or civil war or division along sectarian lines. And so I think a lot of us are hoping that there actually is a plan if this succeeds. But I, for one, am very concerned that it seems like the plan is largely to mobilize people to put their bodies on the line and then to turn around and ask for U.S. intervention and military action, which I think is a nightmare scenario for those in Iran who want a free and democratic future.
Let me play another clip from that interview that Pahlavi gave to CBS where, again, a reminder, he said that he has met with the Trump administration and he welcomes an intervention.
I think President Trump is responding to the call that the Iranian people have. The Iranian people have heard his words. They are naming streets after him in Iran. There's a difference. They know he's no Barack Obama or Joe Biden. And that's why they do have a higher expectation. And we'll see what happens.
So what do you hear there, maybe between the lines?
I hear a invitation for foreign intervention and a willingness to turn the Iranian people over to Donald Trump, who has demonstrated that he does not particularly value democracy or pluralism here in the United States, does not particularly value, frankly, expressions of dissent in the United States. Somebody was just shot in the face in Minnesota, and this administration has defended it. So I'm very wary of the Trump administration being the saviors of the Iranian people, and I'm concerned that that seems to be the message, that help is on the way externally rather than needing to be built internally. I think this also necessitates a discussion about the efforts to promote Reza Pahlavi as the de facto leader of the opposition. There was revelations in Haaretz and by the digital rights group Citizen Lab that found that it was actually the Netanyahu government and the Israelis committing significant resources towards online bot and AI-driven campaigns to try to promote Reza Pahlavi as the heir apparent to what comes next after this regime. We also know that Pahlavi has made several trips to Israel, including at the height of the genocide, urging for or working with Netanyahu, asking for his support in toppling the regime. So I think this is all an echo of the reason that Reza Pahlavi's grandfather was removed by imperial powers, was removed by the Brits and the Russians in 1941. And he came to power, by the way, because of Iranian concerns, in part, concerns about being dominated by outside powers. Reza Pahlavi's father, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was absconded temporarily in 1953 and then was reinstalled on the throne by, in part, through the machinations of the British and the United States, who were upset that Iran was nationalizing its oil. Then he eventually was deposed in 1979, in part because of this perception that Iran was being dominated by outside powers and was not independent. So I think that this return to that mindset, maybe for people with short memories, it doesn't seem ironic or problematic, but I think that's very much what I am hearing, that Iranians' future and Iranians' liberty is dependent on outside powers like the U.S. and Israel. And I don't think Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu, frankly, give a damn about the freedom of Iranians. I think this is about a geopolitical chessboard.
Yeah, and this comes after the action in Venezuela, which you just reminded us of the history with Mohammad Mossadegh being removed by the Brits and the United States after he nationalized oil. And then you have what happened in Venezuela, which also has nationalized its oil industry, and the removal of Maduro there. Do you see any parallels there? And do you think that the Venezuela action that Trump is very proud of could influence whether or not he goes into Iran?
I think the Venezuela operation maybe has the administration a little high on its own supply right now. They maybe feel that the wind is on in their sails because of apparently how easy it was to remove this guy. But I think it actually is for Iran. That model would look like somehow removing the supreme leader or senior decision makers, but then working with elements of the existing regime to oversee the country and, in Trump's worldview, extract resources and send them to U.S. oil companies and things like that. I don't know what transaction Donald Trump has in mind when he's talking about going in and supporting Iran, but I do think that the rhetoric that he has engaged in, telling people to go out into the streets and promising U.S. help, I think that was very much influenced by the sense that they had succeeded in Venezuela. And I'm fearful that the help that is promised is not going to be help that can materially change the situation on the ground for Iranians, but is more about Donald Trump and the politics here, and maybe some far-fetched plan that the administration may have about what Iran can mean for the United States if the U.S. once again is able to dominate the country.
Is there a possibility, though, that there could just be limited strikes on maybe the intelligence infrastructure or something like that without getting involved in a full-blown regime change operation?
It seems like based on what figures in the administration are saying and some of what I've heard, that there is an attempt to try to find a balance here. And you had Marco Rubio suggesting that only non-kinetic measures would be undertaken. So cyber operations, along the lines that you said, targeting the ability of the Islamic Republic to monitor people or crack down. Maybe there's an effort to try to get the internet back on or get people access to the internet. Beyond that, though, symbolic strikes, I think, could be very precarious, because if the Islamic Republic believes that its back is against the wall, you're not going to see sort of the symbolic retaliation that we have seen in past instances where the U.S. and Iran engaged in military exchanges. In 2020, President Trump killed the top general Qasem Soleimani in Iran. And the Iranians responded with largely a symbolic, they signaled well ahead of time what they were going to do. They attacked a base. The U.S. had time to maneuver and make sure that there weren't any fatalities. Similarly, in last year, after the 12-day war, the Iranians retaliated after the U.S. bombed their nuclear facilities, attacked a base in Qatar. But again, very symbolic, highly telegraphed, almost coordinated to an extent with the United States to ensure it wouldn't spill over. Now that may not be the case. And so I think we need to be very careful about not just what the U.S. does, but what that may invite the Iranians to do in retaliation and how this spins out of control. The question to me is, how does this end? And I don't know that the administration actually has an answer to that.
Well, no, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Yep, my pleasure. Thank you.
That's Jamal Abdi. He's the president of the National Iranian American Council.